Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to fix the suspension of the rear of the IS300. As you can tell here, we have quite a bit of gap, plus we need to stiffen up the suspension quite a bit. You can tell already here, there's way too much of a gap. If I had to guess, it's probably about 2.5 inches plus or minus here. So we're going to be doing it with the Tein Coilovers, the Street Bases Z. And here's the product here. See the one we're using here. So this is what we're going to use here. It comes with all the hardware you possibly could need. Plus, you're going to be using existing hardware off the original suspension, if they're in good shape, of course. So we're going to get this wheel taken off, the car lifted up, and we'll get this thing started. Alright, so before we get started here, I wanted to address the tools you're going to need for this project. You need at least some type of compression tool for the existing coil spring here, and a number 6 Allen or hex bit. Also a heavy duty 19 crescent wrench, and then this one here is a 12mm we're going to need. Also, we got a 10mm spline fitting here, socket. This is going to be for some of the ABS controls here, traction control, whatever it is here that we're going to have to break loose. So hopefully this is going to work. I think it will. And also a 14, and this you can use a deep socket 14 if you have it, or whatever you have. Standard wrench will work fine too. I just happen to have this tool that's going to work for me. So a 14, and of course whatever tools you may need. I'm going to be using nothing but power tools just to make the video a little bit more quicker. So before I get started too, I got the back of the car both on jack stands, so they're perfectly evenly balanced to help us to install this. Let's get started. Alright, so just a note, I started the driver's side on purpose because it has one more step than the passenger side. So and that step happens to be this here. There's a sensor here for your ABS and traction control system here. So we're going to have to loosen, actually we're going to take it off, this link here that goes to this little bracket here that goes to your bottom control arm. So we'll do that real quick. We need to take the stress away from this component, and also it's going to be reset in a different location once we get the new suspension on. So I'm just going to move it away on the side like this. No big deal. Just let it hang down. Alright, so this is when we're going to use the 19 socket. And what we're going to do here is we're going to loosen up this bolt right here, this nut off this bolt. That's going to give us a little bit more flexibility on this control arm. And then we're going to remove this one here. This one is a 12. And this connects your it's the end link for your sway bar, so we're going to have to disconnect that too and take the bolt completely out. That bolt can stay in because we're going to have enough flexibility. It's just the baby bolt loosening up, and you'll see later when we take out this shock that flexibility we need here. And also here's the other 19 here, and that's for the shock. So I said, just loosen it. It's going to break it loose here, and take the pressure off of the rubber up in here. So for removing this bolt, it's got that bracket for the ABS switch here, so just be careful. It only goes in one way. There's a little notch here that goes into the control arm. There's a little hole for this. Alright, now we can take the big bolt of the strut. And of course, if the nut on the backside spins, you're going to use your crescent to hold it in. Alright, so now we're in the trunk here, and we have to locate the 3 bolts that hold in the strut. Of course, you're going to have to take off all the lining off of your trunk to get to this point. So, we just got to remove these. We're going to remove them all cleanly right off right now. Make sure not to lose those nuts because we're going to reuse them. Alright, so we're back at the strut, and now we got to remove these 2 12mm bolts right here. I know everything looks like garbage right now, but I'm touching most of this car, pretty much restoring it. And so once we put the new components in, all this is going to look fairly new. Alright, so if you're a one-man wrecking crew like me, what I did is I put a lug nut on here on the bottom stud, closest to the floor, of course. And then I've just got a socket, a long socket here. I'm going to put it on here. I'm going to use my foot to put leverage on the suspension, pushing it down, and while at the same time accessing the strut and getting it out of its spot. Alright, so we got to disassemble the existing strut here. We're going to use some of the components in here. Some you can't see, it's up in this tube. And then the other parts are, of course, this top piece here. Now, you have to compress this spring. Just fair warning, if you don't compress this, just, you know, it's up to you. Maybe put it out on the grass or wherever. But if you unbolt this, there's enough pressure here that this thing will go flying. So just fair warning on this one. So, of course, I'm going to use this setup with the locking pins. And I'm just going to use one just to suck up some of the pressure off of here. You could use 2 just for safety reasons if you want. I'm good there. So now it's just a matter, let me get this in camera here, you guys can see it, good. So I'm going to use a 17 here, and I'm going to hold it around here. I'm going to use that 6 hex that I had. We're not going to reuse this nut, so we can discard that, but we will be using this plate along with this rubber seal here. Alright, so some of the components we're going to be using here in the existing part, everything should slide out. We're going to be using this gasket if yours is still good. There's a slight crack there, no big deal, as long as the surface is good. I'll clean this up before we put this together. Of course, restore this piece. We're going to need, like I said, this sleeve here and this little bit here. The rest, this part here is no longer needed, so we can discard this. Alright, so before I get started putting the assembly back together, I'm going to pre-gap my spacers here. I'm going to use 2 inches to start off with. It just depends on your application where you want to set that. But this is a good time to do it because it's going to be the easiest time to actually do it. Once it's on the car, it's a little bit more difficult. So I'm going to space it 2 inches, and it'll be from right where the black sleeve starts here. It looks like I got quite a bit to go. Reason being, when it's on the car and you start to adjust it, it's easier going down on the shaft than it is going up against the shaft or against the coil spring. And I think we're good there, so I'm just going to leave it there. I'm just going to hand tighten for now. The other thing you want to do here is get a little bit of grease. Like I said, you know, you're going to get road grime on here, so it's always good to grease these as much as you can. You don't have to go super crazy, but just enough to, once you adjust it, you're able to do so. And it also keeps away, you know, rust, just in case you happen to get it, especially if you have roads with, you know, with salt and whatever. But I'm just going to grease these a little bit, and I think we'd be good. So, of course, I live in Texas. I'm not too worried about it. Just got to make sure just to keep them clean every once in a while. Now we'll get to assembling this thing. Alright, so check it out. I got all this kind of cleaned up and restored somewhat. Looks all nice and clean. Except for my brakes, of course, they look like garbage. But there's going to be another video for that, so stay tuned for that. We'll clean it up and make it look really good. Now it's time to install the new shock assembly in here. Or the strut, whatever you want to call it. If you're curious of how to restore these plastics in these areas here, this is the stuff I use for the body part of the fender well here, and then this is the other stuff I use for the plastic pieces. So hopefully it comes out on camera here correctly. So and it does a pretty good job of it. So now we'll get this installed. We're going to install it in reverse. We're going to put it up end first, and then we're going to bend this control arm down and then slide the shock into its spot. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go on top here and start one bolt on at least one of the studs just to hold it in for us. So I got one bolt started, and now it's a matter of getting everything kind of lined up here. You can turn the shaft and kind of line it up where the bolts are going to be, so it makes it easier when you drop it in. Like I said, if you have a buddy, you know, this is the time to use them. Just keep in mind I weigh about 180 pounds, so I'm able to kind of step on this and push it down enough to make the clearance to fit in the shock. You can also put an extension on your lug nut here, and it'll give you a little bit more counterweight. So I'm doing it on my own. This is the way I do it, so you could do it too, depending on how much you weigh. You may have to bounce on it a little bit. Remember, you're not going to break anything. The suspension holds up a 3,000 pound car, so you should be good there. So just like that, you can tell it just gives you just enough clearance to get that shock in there, so fully possible. Just like so. You just gotta have to fiddle around with it just to get that bolt to slip in there. While I'm at it, I'm just going to use a little bit of Loctite here on this bolt. Not too much, just a dab. I'm not going to tie anything down until the very end, until we get all our links kind of connected here. Alright, one thing I wanted to pay attention to was the sensor here for the level of your vehicle. And you remember the bracket that goes behind it. This goes through the bolt. Goes through the bolt here that holds in the end link for the sway bar. So I'm going to go ahead and get this out of the way real quick, and I'm going to go ahead and start this bolt through. Make sure it's all lined up. Alright, for the sensor piece arm here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to insert it here into the bracket like it's supposed to be. I'm just going to use a little bubble balancer here. And I'm going to put it here on top of this arm here. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to set it where it's pretty level to the suspension being dropped down like this. And kind of ballpark it. Of course, if you get an air layer on, we're going to have to probably come in here and adjust this a little bit. I don't think we will, but it's such an easy adjustment, it's not a big deal. I got it pretty balanced there. So I'm going to go ahead and tighten that one down, since that one's pretty much set where I want it. That's good there. And now it's just a matter of tying everything down here. We can tie down this guy, this one here, and this one back here. Remember, we loosened this one up. I'm going to go ahead and use power tools for that. I'm going to have to hold the back side of this bolt with the crescent, just to get the right enough torque on here as it is spinning. Same with this back one. And this one I will tighten up by hand. Now it's a matter of lining everything up here because we got to get these two. We need to get these two bolts to line up here, and of course up in the trunk we got to secure the 3 bolts up there. I'm gonna go ahead and secure the top bolts. Well, actually we'll secure these first. We'll just get them started because you can tell the holes are a little bit off. So we're gonna kind of bend this assembly out this way a little bit. Hopefully not scratch up anything I already did here, but and then just kind of put these bolts in loose. These will be the last bolts we actually tie it down. Alright, so those are set for now, and then we can go to the trunk and tighten up the 3 bolts up there. So that's the finish up of the install here. Now I'm just going to put this tire on, and we'll drop this on the floor and see what we get. Alright, so this is what the gap looks like so far. If you remember when we're assembling the struts together, or the shocks, whatever, I adjusted it up 2 inches. And so before I dropped the car down, I went ahead and adjusted it down about 1 inch. So I still got about 1 inch to play to go downward. But here's what the gap looks like here. Of course, this is going to be a plus and minus gap since I just barely dropped the car down. And so the suspension still needs to settle. Best way to settle is actually just driving your car. So you're going to have probably a 1/4 inch to 1/2 inch less gap here. Once that happens. But here's what we're stuck with so far. There's about 1 inch gap. Like I said, a lot of this gap is going to go away once we drive it. And I still got some play in the adjustment of the shocks. So this is where we're at. Doesn't look too bad. Of course, I'm going to be adjusting it based off performance and see how it feels on the road. So I guess thanks for joining me on this one. We're going to do the front suspension as well with the same coilover springs and the whole setup. And also we're going to do a complete rebuild of the front end too. So stay tuned to that. And of course the rear brakes, like I mentioned, we're going to do make those fancy and make them pop a little bit better than what they are. So thanks for joining me, and stay tuned to the next one.